We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for coming today. I'm excited to introduce you to Rowdie, who will be taking you through some areas of healthcare analytics, which is obviously a very broad field. So we're going to narrow it down to a few specific topics that Rowdie is an expert in. My name's Taylor. I'm the marketing manager for Rowdie, and that's all I really have to say. So I'm going to hand it over to Rowdie. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. It's kind of next to the share screen option. You can ask any questions throughout the webinar. We might not be able to get to them in the moment, but we will answer as many as we can at the end. So with that, go for it, Rowdie.
Thank you. Thank you, Taylor. And thank you so much for organizing this webinar and hosting it. It's really greatly appreciated. And thank you so much to the audience for coming. I know you have very busy schedules, so I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for coming. As Taylor mentioned, please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A. We're really excited to answer them. So without further ado, here is the plan for what we expect to cover today. We'll do a little intros. We'll talk briefly about what healthcare analytics is and why it's important to leverage it for your organization. We'll also discuss applying data analytics and healthcare analytics to understand and improve certain facets of your organization. For example, the patient experience and your marketing and search engine optimization. As far as introductions go, my name is Rowdie McDonald. I'm Rowdie's product manager, and I'm also part of our analytics team. My email address is on the left side of the screen right now. It's my first initial and then my last name at rowdie.com. If you think of any questions later, or if we run out of time during Q&A, or if there's something I don't cover that you really wanted to talk about, please feel free to email me. I love analytics and I love healthcare, and I relish any opportunity I can get to talk about this sort of thing. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's something we didn't get to cover that you're curious about and that you think I could help with. So a little bit about me. I started my career at Northeastern University, and there I got a bachelor's degree in business analytics. I always kind of knew I was passionate about healthcare. When I was younger in high school, I volunteered weekly at my local hospital, and it was something I really, really enjoyed doing. And during my time at Northeastern, I had the opportunity to participate in their co-op program, and co-ops are 6-month-long internships. And one of the internships I did that I really enjoyed was for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. And I did some analytics for them there, analyzing the patient experience and patient treatment workflows. That led me to my current position at Rowdie, where I do data analytics and product management. If you're not familiar with Rowdie, I know many of you maybe are, but if you're not, Rowdie is really, really good at getting patient feedback. What your patients have to say about their visit with you, that's what we do. We do after appointment surveys, and we also help your patients find the best place to share their feedback about you online so that their voice can reach other potential patients that might be looking into your practice. That's pretty much the only thing we do, so we do it really, really well. And my job at Rowdie is to help you make sense of all that data that we help you collect. And that ranges from specific feedback on a confidential survey to tracking what your patients are saying about you online. What I really want to do is give you the information you need in a way that makes you feel empowered to use it. We know every healthcare organization has vastly different needs, and I want to accommodate that. I want to make analytics easy, convenient, and even fun for you. So it's not just another thing you have to check off your to-do list or something that you have to remember to do. You're going to see this slide a few more times. I apologize in advance if it gets a little boring. This is mostly for me. I tend to get really excited about small details, and it's nice to be able to reference the roadmap after we cover a major topic. That way I can focus on the details without losing the big picture. So let's jump right in. What's healthcare analytics and why is it important? I did a little bit of research before this webinar, as one typically does before speaking on a topic. And a lot of the definitions I found for healthcare analytics were so verbose. They were maybe 2-3 sentences long. I pulled out a little snippet that I kind of liked and I thought resonated with me. Healthcare analytics is analysis of the data, whatever that means, using quantitative and qualitative techniques to be able to explore for trends and patterns in the data. I believe this quote comes from the University of San Diego. In this case, quantitative means numbers and qualitative means words. When I read this, I thought that I needed a little bit of qualitative analysis to understand the definition at all. So I made us a little working definition of healthcare analytics. It means collecting information and using it to make informed decisions. If we break down the University of San Diego's definition, we can see that most of it is about using information, ways to make your data work for you. And that's awesome. That's really great. That's a big part of analytics. But my question when reading it is, what is that information? Where did it come from? And I see this so often in analytics literature, discussion boards, online forums. A lot of the analytics conversation assumes that you already have data and that you already have the right data. So specifically, a lot of the discussion in the healthcare analytics space is about this part in teal on the slide. Processing data and making it easy to use. But they forget the first part. In order to process data and make it easy to use, you have to have data. And another thing that really frequently gets off, which I'd like to overemphasize it here just because it gets forgotten so often, is the part that comes after the analysis. After you come to your conclusion based on your data, you need to use those conclusions. You have to look at the data, process it, and then act. And an analysis that you can't act on is a bad analysis. At the end of the day, healthcare analytics is about good decision making. It's about collecting all of the possible information about a problem or a situation in order to make an informed decision. So why is healthcare analytics important? The end goal of analytics is probably the most important part. And all the while you're collecting data and analyzing it, you absolutely can't lose sight of the end goal. And that's using your analysis to make good decisions, to make informed decisions. In my opinion, at least, an informed decision is never a bad decision, regardless of the outcome, because you took in all of the facts you had available to you at the time, and you came up with a thing to do. You didn't flounder and come up decisionless. You analyzed the data, you looked at the information you had at the time, and you came to a conclusion based on the information that you had. Regardless of the outcome, that's the best you could have done. And I really think that analytical decisions and data-driven decisions are almost always good decisions. Our intuition, don't get me wrong, it's great. Our brain is so good at recognizing patterns, and we have a little mini processor up here. Our gut feel is great. Some of us are inherently very good at making good decisions and coming to good conclusions, but it's so much easier to rely on those decisions and to convey those decisions to others when we can support them with real facts, with cold, hard facts, when we make data-driven decisions. So we covered what healthcare analytics is. We spoke about why it's important, but that was mostly a definition. We didn't really talk about healthcare analytics in the real world. So I'm going to uncross that one for a second and just dive a little bit deeper and talk about what are some of the applications of healthcare analytics? What does it mean to us? Let's get to the healthcare part of healthcare analytics. Healthcare analytics is a very broad field. The types of data we could analyze include all of these things on the left side of the screen and even more. For example, you could do analytics evaluating physician performance, and you could use it to drive compensation. You could analyze the effectiveness of certain healthcare methods and technologies. You could analyze patient-reported outcomes. There are so many things you can analyze in the healthcare field, which is what makes it so fun. Some of the infrastructure or domains that support healthcare analytics include the things on the right side of the screen. How do you get your data? How do you store your data? How do you manipulate, retrieve, and analyze your data? Even things like statistical analysis, prediction and forecasting, or artificial intelligence and machine learning, those all fit squarely into the domain of analytics. It's a large field. I would love to talk about these things. I know we're all busy people and this webinar doesn't go for nearly as long as I'd like it to go. So I selected just a couple things to talk about today. The reason I selected these topics is because they're the topics that I personally have the most knowledge on and I feel the most authorized to speak about. But I also have brief knowledge into other areas and domains in healthcare analytics. So if you have questions on any of those, feel free to email me and I would love to chat with you about that. I see we don't have any questions so far in the Q&A, which I'm glad to hear. If you think of anything, feel free to put it in there and I can take a little pause on these roadmap slides and talk to you about it. But we can just dive right in. Next is applying data analysis and healthcare analytics to these two fields here, patient experience and marketing and search engine optimization. So applying data analysis to the patient experience. I apologize for the lengthy slide, and I also sincerely apologize while I read directly from the lengthy slide, but this slide is very important. It's the foundation of our chat here today. This is the analytical decision-making process that you can apply to any type of analysis. So we're gonna apply it right now to patient experience, but keep an open mind. This applies to other things as well. The first thing you wanna do, first thing you have to do is collect data on the patient experience, and you should collect that from the patients. After you get that data, you need to organize and clean it and make sure it's accurate. Next, you can analyze the data using dimensions and metrics that are important to you and your team. And finally, use the insights you've gained to make changes to improve the patient experience. These steps actually come directly from the definition we spoke about earlier. Here's that ugly slide again, the one we were talking about earlier. The analytical decision-making process that we went through basically just says how to do this, how to collect information and use it to make an informed decision. So here's an even uglier slide, the steps I just mentioned before, but highlighted with the same color coding. The first two steps are about collecting information. The second step is about using it. And the third step is about making an informed decision. So let's dive a little deeper into each of these steps to talk about how you can use data analytics to optimize your patient experience. Step 1 and step 2, collecting data on the patient experience and organizing and cleaning the data, making sure it's accurate. We mentioned earlier that in order to perform an analysis with the end goal of making an informed decision, we have to have data to analyze. That part's pretty important. And I can't stress how important it is to have access to lots of good, clean data. Good data means it has to be accurate. You can't expect to be able to make an informed decision on information that's factually untrue. You'd be surprised how easy it is for bad data to creep in. For example, manual entry errors, poor data cleaning and analysis. Sometimes it's something as simple as someone clicking the wrong button on a survey question. You also have to have the right data. You can't do an analysis on your patient's waiting room time experience if all you're collecting is patient contact information. If you want insight into a particular area of operations, you have to be collecting operations data. Your data also has to come at the right time. This point is very often overlooked and it comes into play a lot. If you need analytical conclusions and data-driven decisions for tomorrow's board meeting, you can't start collecting data tonight. Data collection is a continuous, ongoing process, and the more you collect data, the more it grows. So you have to establish processes that work in the background for you to collect this information so that when you need to make a data-driven decision, the best type of decision, you already have all the data you need to make that decision. And finally, arguably most important, you need to have lots of it. The more data that backs a decision, the better the decision will be. For example, say Jane Doe has an appointment and she says, listen, I don't like the parking options you have at this place. You shouldn't revamp your whole office location based on that one comment. Maybe Jane is stressed about an upcoming procedure, or there's some outside factor in her life that's making her say something like that. Maybe she drives a huge gas guzzling Hummer and it doesn't fit in any normal parking spot. But say 50 out of 51 patients surveyed said something similar, then it's time to do something about that parking situation. So the more data you have, the more confident you can be in your decision. If I had 500 data points and 499 of them said the same thing, that would make me even more confident than having 51 data points where 50 people said the same thing. Now on the right side of the page, your data has to be clean. That means it's not missing anything important. Data with blank spaces where important information should be is bad data. For example, say you're trying to look at which of your locations has the most effective treatment workflow. You could have all of the most wonderful treatment process data in the world, but if the location name is blank, if you forgot to record which location that treatment data was from, that data isn't going to be useful for your analysis. For the purpose of that analysis, that data would be worthless. Your data also has to be organized. It should be in a structured and understandable format. I'm sure most of us here at some point in our lives have seen a really bad Excel file. And if you haven't seen one of those, I'm so happy for you. Picture a child's art project or a really messy sandwich. It's lovely that we have the data, and that's a great first step. But if we can't understand a single thing that's going on in there, if we can't read it and shape it and use it in our decision-making process later, it's not very useful for us. It's just a messy sandwich. It's basically a salad at that point. Some people, when they conduct their own surveys without the use of an outside service that's professional in that, they'll do this data cleaning step in Excel. And Excel has several features that make this pretty easy. They allow you to find blank cells. You can sort and filter to understand your data more clearly. At something like a larger organization, on the other hand, your analysts and your database administrators will take care of this step for you. Gotta have access to good, clean data in order to do a good analysis. One of the most important things about data collection is having a lot of data. When I was in school, they taught us that a good rule of thumb for enough data for an analysis was 100 data points. But that rule of thumb will change based on your analysis. If you're doing an analysis of appointment data and you have 100 appointments every single day, you're not going to get a good picture of what appointments look like overall and over time if you have only 100 data points. It's not large enough relative to your appointment volume. Sometimes a good amount of data for an analysis can be over 10,000 data points. That's why I always say the best time to start collecting data is yesterday. The more data points you have, the better your analysis will be, and the more informed your decisions based on that analysis will be. We can go back to the Jane Doe example. If you have one data point about the parking lot, it's not great information. If you have 50 data points about the parking lot, that's good information. But if you have 500 data points about the parking lot, that's great information. The more information you have, the more confident you can be in your decision. Now, if you need that much data, you can't do it all by yourself. It's impossible. It'd be more than a full-time job. Imagine handing out patient experience surveys after every appointment and then having someone manually enter them into the system. It's not going to go well. It's just too much. You need too much data in order to make a good analysis, to make an informed decision, to be able to do it all by hand. You need some sort of automatic background process that can collect data for you. That way, when it's time to make a decision, You already have all of the information you need. Automatic processes also help to remove bias. If you think of the handing out surveys example, the front desk person might only hand out surveys to patients they like or patients they know are going to complete it, and that's biased data. The automated background process for collecting data removes a little bit of that bias, and it helps you get better results. The reason I keep falling back on the surveys example is because when it comes to soliciting data to improve the patient experience, if that's your end goal, my favorite way to do that is using surveys. If you want to know what someone thought, how their experience was, you should ask them. Reputation clients don't really have to think about this step ever. We have automated interfaces with most PM and EMR systems, and they're triggered to send out a survey right as the patient's walking out to their car when the visit is still fresh on their mind. But if you don't have Reputation or some similar service and you're serious about improving the patient experience at your organization, you might want to think about some way to set up an automated background process to start collecting patient feedback about their experience. So we spoke about collecting data, organizing it and cleaning it, making sure it's accurate. Now let's chat about the fun step, the flashy step, step number 3. This is probably going to be the full hour long of content for any other analytics webinars. It's just that it is so fun and so focused on that I felt I really had to emphasize the part that comes before and after it. So what to do with your data once you have it. There are a few main techniques: monitoring KPIs, creating charts and graphs, and creating dashboards. These techniques are very important and they will help influence your decision making. But there are certain building blocks that underlie those pillars of business analytics. The dimensions and metrics, these building blocks, they're what help you create analytical techniques like KPIs, charts, and dashboards. Dimensions are our slicers. They're the things we use to drill down, break apart, and dive into the data. Dimensions are the part after the by when you say, can I see this by? Some examples on this slide. Can I see this by date? Can I see this by location? Or can I see this by provider? I think the most popular dimension that our clients love to see when analyzing patient experience is by date. What's our patient experience like over time? Is it improving based on recent changes we've made? Are there certain months of the year when patients are generally unhappy? In other words, what's our patient experience by date? Metrics are what we're measuring. It's the thing we're looking at when we're taking measurements of the patient experience. It's the part before the by when you say, can I see this by? Some examples are on the slide. Can I see the average rating? Can I see the net promoter score? Can I see the average patient sentiment score? Metrics are some measure of success that is trackable, and it stays constant over time. Every time you track it the same way. If you take any one metric and you isolate it by itself, that's a KPI. For example, you could look at your average rating points KPI. If you put your metrics and your dimensions together, the things you're looking at and the things you're slicing, that's a chart. So for example, you could look at average rating points by date or net promoter score by location. If you put your KPIs and your charts together, then you have a dashboard. I have an example dashboard that I'd love to show you all. So I'm going to switch screens quickly. Pardon me while I refresh the page. Timed out. So this is a great example of a dashboard you can use for analytical decision making. Across the top of the page here, we have our KPIs. It's one metric. This is the average rating points metric. This is the number of testimonials metric. This is a KPI that we can track and we can watch and we can benchmark. On the bottom of the page, we have a graph. This is a metric. In this case, it's two metrics, the line and the bar. A metric split by a dimension. So we have average rating points by date, and we have number of reviews by date. Here's another example of a dashboard that we use to monitor the patient experience. This is a metric by a dimension. There's no KPIs on this page. We just have average rating points by location, or number of reviews and average rating points by location. Anyone can build a dashboard provided they have access to data. Not all dashboards are very good. The most important part of analytics and dashboarding is that you're choosing the right building blocks. You're choosing metrics and dimensions that are relevant and meaningful to you and your team. This dashboard, it might be really, really good for pediatric ophthalmic consultants, the example practice that we're looking at here. It might be really good for them. It might be exactly what they need, because comparing the average rating score across different locations is impactful for them. It means something for them. Locations is a great dimension for them to use because it's relevant to them. For a different organization, say perhaps a much larger organization, this might be a really bad dashboard. Maybe they have 150 locations, so this dashboard is just super messy for them. It's like a sandwich salad. Maybe they need a different slicer. Maybe they like the metric, but they need a different slicer in order to be able to draw any relevant conclusions from this. One thing I like to do when I'm building reports and dashboards is to add some element of user interactivity. That way the user can customize the dashboard so that it's impactful for their organization. They can rearrange the building blocks and even swap them out to look at data slices using dimensions and metrics that are meaningful for them. So for example, if location isn't impactful for my organization, I could choose to look at the data by appointment type instead. All right. Moving on to step number 4, after the flashy step. This is a step that people often forget. After you do an analysis, you want to use the insights that you've gained and apply them. After you do your analysis, your conclusions should become apparent to you. If you have the foundation of good, clean, timely data, and you choose building blocks, dimensions, and metrics that are meaningful to you, actionable patterns will start to emerge. One of my favorite tips for creating an actionable analysis is to start with a guiding question. When you're using data-driven decision-making, usually it's prompted by some sort of decision, some sort of question. Keeping that decision in mind can also help you choose the right data and the right building blocks to help inform your decision. And it can also help springboard other questions. One of the things I find when I'm doing analysis is that usually, this always happens, not usually, always, I start with one question and I end up with 20. Maybe the first question isn't even a question. I'm just monitoring performance. I'm saying, hey, I wonder how the Upper West Side location did last month. And then all of a sudden I'm wondering, well, that seems interesting, but I'm not sure what it means. How does that compare to our other location last month? Or how does that compare to other ophthalmology practices in New York last month? How does it compare to the month prior? And depending on my findings, say I find, for instance, that that location is doing a lot better than I expected, my next question is why? What factors are driving that difference? Sometimes, as I mentioned, guiding questions are prompted by a specific decision. For example, Jane Doe complaining about parking at your practice, and you need to figure out whether that's a trend worth investigating and whether other patients feel the same way. But more often than not, I find that guiding questions come up by themselves when I'm just regularly checking my reports. If you have reports that are helpful to you, it's important to check them every day, or maybe not every day, but as often as you can and regularly. That way, if you're familiar with your go-to reports, you can instantly recognize abnormalities. As a product manager, I'm always checking up and monitoring which areas of reiterate are being used. As a practice manager, you might want to regularly check up on patient feedback. It's kind of like an EKG for your patient experience. If you have a habit of checking your reports regularly, when something abnormal happens out of the blue, you're the first person to know and you can react quickly. You can also occasionally spend time diving deeper to anticipate areas for improvement before they become urgent. If it's possible for you, and especially if you have Reiterate, I recommend setting up scheduled emails so that your most important reports regularly appear at the top of your inbox. I have a couple of reports like that. One of them shows at the top of my email list. Every Wednesday morning, I just give it a quick check and I make sure everything looks all right. If I happen to have free time later, if it's one of those light days, I might go visit the report directly and interact with it a bit, adjust the metrics and dimensions, and look at the details more thoroughly. Okay, I really like this graphic. It's a quick visual review of what we've covered so far when it comes to using data analytics to improve the patient experience. We have to start off with a solid foundation of accurate, clean data and lots of it. Then we build our pillars, the bulk of our analysis, and we use appropriate building blocks, metrics, and dimensions that are meaningful to us. And to top it all off, at the summit, we're able to make data-driven decisions, good decisions. Okay, back to the roadmap. I missed this slide. I don't know if you did too. We've spoken a bit about applying data analysis to improve your patient experience. Let's talk about how we can apply that same analytical decision-making process to look at your online reputation and to optimize your online reputation. I'll be speaking mostly about online marketing and reputation SEO because that's what I'm most familiar with and I have the most authority to speak about. If you're not familiar with reputation SEO yet, it's a really, really important element of SEO that's gaining more and more traction. Google and other search engines are really prioritizing trust marketing and getting patients' feedback from other patients to help them understand where they need to go. It bumps to the top of the search results if you have a lot of online reviews and a lot of lengthy comments. This is talking about the local search, when people search for things like best podiatrist near me or best pediatrist near me, pediatrics. Yeah, reputation SEO is building up patient-generated content online, and it increases your likelihood that your practice will appear at the top of search results. I know digital marketing is always changing. And if you're not an absolute expert in it, it's really hard to speak to. There's always new technologies, new advancements, new major players. But what I'm about to say here, it's the exact same analytical decision-making process we apply to optimizing the patient experience, and you can apply it to anything. You can apply it to any area of your practice, analyzing operations data, all those topics in healthcare analytics that we spoke about before. You can even apply it to your personal finances. You can apply this to analytical, data-driven decision-making process to any area you choose. We're going to talk about how to apply it to marketing and SEO. The steps are the exact same. Instead of working with patient experience data, we're working with the way patients see you online. You have to have access to lots of good, clean data. You have to make sure that you build a process that works in the background to collect that data for you. And it helps you understand your online reputation. You are not, you could try, but you're probably not going to visit every single Google listing owned by your practice every single day, not even once a week, not even once a month. That's too much for one person to do, and it's too much for your brain to try and process into a conclusion. We have great brains, we have great intuition, we're able to process a lot of information, but once it starts to get to a certain point, our brains can't handle it anymore. We need something to aggregate that information, to get it into our hands in a readable, understandable format. Reputation has something like that. We have an automated process that works in the background to collect information for our clients. I can actually show that pretty quickly. So here on the analytics dashboard, we have the results of our automated process that works to collect patient feedback. These are the 8 comments here on the left. And we also have the results of an automated process that works to get information about our client's online reputation. These are things with the Google logo, or say the Vitals logo, or the Healthgrades logo. We're constantly going out there and getting new information so that our analytics can be that much more powerful and that much more impactful to our clients' organizations. We also organize and clean that data. We wouldn't want to present it in a way that's not organized and clean, so we do that as well. In the analytical decision-making process applied to marketing and SEO data analysis, we still want to use dimensions and measures that are relevant to us to make reports, charts, graphs, and KPIs that are helpful to us. Sometimes those dimensions are the same dimensions we used for patient experience analysis. Sometimes they're different. Most of the dimensions I listed on this slide are the exact same. One that I added was online review company. When I'm analyzing someone's online presence, I like to slice it by the marketing channel. In the specific cases that I tend to look at regularly, I like to isolate Google so I can focus on my Google business profiles, and I like to pull apart the data and slice it by, the marketing channel. The metrics on the right side of the page are the metrics that we at Reputation really strongly suggest looking at, working on, monitoring, and keeping track of to optimize your online image. That's your rating score, what flashes up like a big billboard at the top of the page when people search for your practice. It's the number of online reviews you have that helps boost your ranking in SEO results. The recency of reviews also helps boost your ranking. How recent was the most recent patient review of your practice? And Google actually also uses responses to reviews. So if the practice is responding regularly, that also helps boost you up to the top of search results. You can compile these dimensions and these metrics into a report that makes it easy for you to see, and it also helps you keep track of these things and identify areas for improvement. I'll show you an example of a report we have at Reputation that does that, a very surface level report. There are ways to dive into it deeper if you'd like to do so, but we have limited time here today, so I'll just show you a glimpse of what that looks like. If you're not a Reputation client, we'd be happy to put one together for you just to give you an overview of what your online reputation looks like based on data that we can collect from the internet, and just give you a brief overview. These are our metrics here. How many of our Google listings are over 4.5-star rating? How many of our Google listings have over 20 reviews? Are there recent reviews? Are you responding regularly? And then we're also slicing that by the dimension of location listings versus doctor listings, because we often find that some practices who have never used a review generating service don't focus enough on the doctor's online reputations. They really just focus on their practice's online reputation. So that's one of our favorite slicers when we're just doing, one of our favorite dimensions when we're just doing a cursory analysis of someone's online reputation. What I'm trying to say is use what you find. If you have trouble figuring out where to start, just take a quick pulse check, like the pulse check I just showed you. try to get the broad strokes. What do my patients and my potential patients see when they search for me online? If that ends up leading you to other questions, dig into the details. If you spot areas for improvement, work toward improving them. Analytics is a holistic discipline, and it involves looking at the big picture and at the details at the same time. So I do apologize if I gave you whiplash by jumping from the big picture to the details and back to the big picture and back to the details repeatedly throughout this presentation. That's what my job's like. That's the way I think. I think if I did an all down to business webinar, here's the nitty gritty of how to optimize your patient experience, it wouldn't work very well for me and my style. Similarly, if I did a bird's eye view, like here are the broad strokes, let's do the definition the whole entire time and never talk about the specifics, that also wouldn't work very well for me. And I don't think you'd like either of those either. It's important to focus on the building blocks while keeping your eye on what you're building up to. And what you're building up to is informed decisions, good decisions. I know your jobs in the medical industry are especially busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. Analytics is super easy to push down further on the to-do list, but it's such an impactful field, and keeping track of what's really going on in your organization and in your online reputation can have a huge difference when it comes to getting a leg up on your competitors. If you don't have time to make data-driven decisions, I really encourage you to hire someone to give you data-driven recommendations, someone to give you solutions based on relevant conclusions from accurate, factual information. This slide is for me and my fellow right-brained thinkers in the audience who doesn't love a fully crossed off to-do list, but there is so much left to do. I hope I gave you a lot to think about. I know it's a little overwhelming if you're just stepping into data-driven decision-making for the first time. One cool thing to know is that you're not alone. At Rowdie, we have a whole team focused on soliciting, collecting, organizing, and cleaning your data. We have a whole separate team focused on compiling the data using dimensions and metrics that are relevant to you. And we have a whole other team focused on thinking through those analyses, thinking through your performance, and offering you data-driven solutions. Please feel free to email me if you have any lingering or off-topic questions after the Q&A portion. Also, I included the Rowdie's broad information email here. They would be more than happy to offer you a 30-day free trial of our services if you're interested. That's all. Thank you for your time. I'm excited to answer your questions. Please feel free to pop them in the Q&A portion or in the chat and let me know.
Looks like we have one thus far. How can I improve my online reputation once I find an area that needs improvement?
Oh, that's a good question. That's similar to what we were talking about here. I don't know if you noticed this. I noticed this. Let me go back to Rowdie for a second. We have this big X in the doctor listings on the recency for this practice. So one thing that they need to do is they need to ask more patients to go to their doctor's listings and leave a review. That's kind of a hard thing to do, and I would really recommend using a review generation service like Rowdie. Rowdie has a really cool algorithm that we use when we send patients an after appointment survey, and it automatically redirects patients to the listings that need it the most. So our algorithm is called Pollinate because we're pollinating the review sites. It's really cute. But our algorithm is, as we speak, sending patients to these doctor listings in hopes of getting a more recent review. Any other questions? Don't be shy. I love talking about this stuff. Oh, we have another good question. How can I set up an always-on data collection process? That's a really good question. It's a hard thing to do. Oftentimes you'll have to find programmers or developers who are experienced in setting up automated solutions to do that type of thing for you. If you don't have access to programmers or developers, I might recommend poking around the softwares that you use on a day-to-day basis. A lot of the softwares that you use have places where you can export data. So almost every software that we use, whether it's a PM, EMR, scheduling system, telephone tree, anything like that, they collect data for themselves, and sometimes you have access to that data. So you could be able to download it and manipulate it and find dimensions and metrics that you want to look at and analyze those that way. I would also say that if you're interested in finding automated data collection on specifically your patient experience and your digital marketing and reputation SEO, the best way to do that is use someone who's already doing that. So one of the things we do at Reputation is we collect patient feedback. We send after visit surveys, and we also go out onto the web and get information about your reputation SEO profiles so that you can view it and analyze it in our Reputation dashboards.
We have a handful of questions. Let me sort these out for you. Mike asked, if a practice won't do automatic surveys to patients via interface with their EMR, what do you recommend instead to bolster their participation?
That's a good question. I think, Mike also mentioned cards with QR codes, posters with QR codes. I think those are really great ways to augment participation. They can definitely help improve participation. Also, something like mentioning it at checkout is a really great way to improve participation. If there's no automatic background process to collect patient feedback, it does get a little difficult. You could always, make sure that you're posting those QR codes everywhere you can find, but it's often best to use some sort of service where, say, you upload a file full of patient emails, and then those email addresses are processed and surveys are sent out. Because if you're relying on patients to self-select for a survey by scanning a QR code or something like that, you're prone to a little bit of self-selection bias. Usually the patients who elect to do something like that were either really dissatisfied or really satisfied. And often we find it skews toward the more negative front. Patients are more likely to self-select for a survey if they're dissatisfied than if they're satisfied. So you can definitely use QR codes and self-selection as a last resort, but be warned that you might get a little bit more negative feedback than you were if you were sending surveys to everyone.
I'm going to skip to the bottom question because it's a little bit related to Mike's with regard to interfacing with an EMR, which is what this question is asking. How does Reputation know who my patients are in order to send review requests to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Reputation sets up an interface with your check-in, check-out system, and your interface when you're recording patient information to sign them up for an appointment, it'll have their email and phone number. Usually that's something you solicit from the patient. So we can set up a system. We have several out-of-the-box systems that we can just press the on button on, and we can connect directly with your check-in and check-out system, your PM and your EMR, so that as soon as the patient checks out, we get notified with the person's contact information that we have to send the survey or the request for an online review to.
Then it looks like we have one more in here. Back to data analysis type stuff. But what happens if I don't have a guiding question or some sort of decision that I'm trying to make? Can I still perform analysis?
Yeah, you can. You can do some pretty fun types of analysis if you don't have a question or some sort of decision you're faced with. So I mentioned briefly that if you regularly look at your reports, questions will come up. One day you'll see something that didn't look like the other days. You'll see something and you'll wonder, why is that? And that's a good guiding question. But if you're just regularly checking your reports, or if you have spare time and you want to dig into stuff like that, you can do something. It's not done often, except by researchers and things like that, but it's called an exploratory analysis. And you're kind of just playing around with the dimensions and the measures until you see something that looks interesting for you. I can actually show a quick example of that because we have a couple more minutes left. So back to the report we originally looked at to demonstrate dimensions and metrics related to the patient experience. With something like an exploratory analysis, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to swap out your dimensions and your metrics to get different types of information until you come to something like a question. So, for example, say I want to swap out my start date and I want to look at far more data than I have in the basic regular view. And I think, that's interesting. It's kind of a wobbly line, though. I don't know if that makes much sense to me. You might want to swap out week or month for something like quarter or year, so you can see how your yearly or quarterly performance looks like. You can also switch out separate dimensions and analyze different time comparisons, like this 2,500 reviews is 91 reviews more than that amount of days previously. Exploratory analysis is one of my favorite types of analysis. It's when you're just kind of poking around, playing around with things, trying to figure out if there are any trends you should look to. Like I said before, you can switch location to appointment type and try and look at the data like that instead. It's a lot more freewheeling and easygoing to do an analysis when you don't have a guiding question. You kind of just look around and see if there's anything that prompts any guiding questions.
Mike has another question for us. Out of every 100 patients seen, what's the realistic percentage that will complete a survey using an automatic EMR feed post-visit?
Oh, that's a great question. At Rowdie, our response rate is 20%, sometimes upward. We see better response rates from text surveys if we text the patient as opposed to sending them an email. Sometimes for text surveys, don't tell anyone I said this and giving away industry secrets, but sometimes for text surveys, we have seen exceptional examples where we get 33 to 36% of patients responding to that survey and sending back information to us. So say you have 100 patients, that means you're going to get 33 fresh new data points for you to take a look at and get more information about what those patients' experiences were like at your practice.
And then Jen had a question. Is Raider8 an OAS CAPS approved vendor?
I don't believe so. I'm pretty sure we're not. And the reason for that being is it's very closely related to the prior question that we focus on getting lots of data for our clients. And that doesn't mean lots of data from one individual patient. It means lots of data for lots of patients. So we try to make sure that it's very quick, simple, and easy to answer our survey. When the patient gets a survey from us, they see the subject line, it only takes 8 seconds. Because it does, our surveys really only have rate your provider and then 4 questions on it. Maybe, what was your waiting room time? Would you refer us to a friend? What was the staff friendliness like? Really just 4 questions. We can rotate out questions, so you can have a pool of, say, 10 or 15 questions that we randomly select from to make sure that every question gets answered. But because we send surveys to every single patient, not just a small portion of patients, and because our surveys are so short, we're able to get mass amounts of data in very small amounts of time that can give you some really good insights into your practice operations and your patient experience with your practice. Another thing, and This might be too lengthy of an answer to this question, and I apologize, but after your patient takes the survey, we ask them if they want to leave an online review. So we see things like people going from 10 to 20 online reviews per month to something like 100 online reviews per month, and even crazier than that. So there are reasons we're not an OAS CAPS approved vendor, but we believe that they're justified, and that pairing Raiderate with an OAS CAPS approved vendor is justified and is honestly sometimes a really good approach, because you can fulfill that requirement and then also get really great data and lots of online reviews.
I think we've hit every question here, but we still have a couple minutes if anybody wants to ask another question. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Rowdie, for a wonderful webinar. That was fantastic. And thank you to all of our participants for wonderful questions. Thank you, Mike. Mike said very educational. Thank you for all the great information. We appreciate you coming, Mike, and the rest of you as well for joining us today. As Rowdie said, if you have questions, you can email her directly or send us an email at info@raiderate.com. And otherwise, we're going to stay on the line for another minute in case anybody has questions. And if not, then I hope you all have a great day.
As Taylor mentioned, thank you so much for coming. I had fun, and I hope you did too. Feel free to let me know if you want to talk about analytics some more. I love picking good dimensions, picking good metrics, putting those into charts and graphs that are meaningful and impactful, and ultimately, at the end of the day, making sure that those charts and graphs and KPIs help you run your organization better.
All right, thanks again, everybody. We're going to wrap it up. Once again, email us if you have additional questions, and have a wonderful day.
Bye, everyone.